This is our second video in this series of introduction on ILA, and like we'll mention all through ILA, great teachers and great leaders ask great questions. And the second part of that is you're not the answer key. Let them figure it out, let them flounder. We need to know their misconceptions in order to create new learning. Because when we get to neurology of learning, we'll find out that these neuronal growth is the result of learning. And for neuronal growth to occur, it has to attach to old learning. The neurons can only grow from what's already there. It doesn't create them out of thin air. So we know their misconceptions, and they know their misconceptions, we can then connect the new learning to the old learning. That's when it becomes relevant to the student. So ask great questions, and we'll do that throughout ILA. Your paradigm will be challenged continuously through ILA. If it was not challenged, then I don't guess we could call it a leadership academy. But and although it's easy to ask just rote questions, and we need to ask deeper questions to show we do have an understanding, we do care, or shows our interest. Just ask the right questions to students. And those questions are supposed to stimulate critical thinking. We get frustrated because we have to put so much effort in teaching communication and critical thinking. But if we think back to when most of us were growing up, going through college, you say, well, where did you learn to critically think and communicate? And the answer the majority of the time is just what occurred in our upbringing. Very rarely was that something we actually learned in the classroom. We might have improved upon it in the classroom, but we had that going in. So a couple of generations ago, communication critical thinking was a pretty common commodity. What wasn't common was knowledge. We just didn't have access to it other than books or finding somebody that knew a lot about it. We just didn't have access. Now let's fast forward to today. The rare commodity is not the knowledge we have. That's most cheap and easily accessible as it's ever been in human history. So if that's all we're offering our students is just transmission of knowledge, we're failing them. So we say, why do we have to teach the critical thinking and communication? Well, because most are anyway, are not getting that in their upbringing. And then we'll talk in our sessions about some reasons why that's true as technology enhances. Because when we're talking critical thinking, we're really talking about what's the first step. And the first step to critical thinking is making observations. So has technology taken away some of those observations? All we know is our students having a problem communicating critical thinking. We hear that from businesses every day. So incorporating that into what we do is a challenge. Ask questions. Critical thinking is not answering the question, it's questioning the answer, and that's what we want students to do. So the more questions they're asking in class, that's our evidence they're engaged and they're thinking. Call it Socratic method. We have all kind of different types of questions. Once again, to keep the video shorter, you can pause these videos whenever needed to go back over some of these things. We're not in a course where we're having to memorize information for a test or going over technical information or memorizing technical definitions. We're talking about things we're using every single day in our chosen profession, the things that are relevant to what we do every day. So these are the kind of questions we want to use to probe further. Don't let students get away with just, you ask a question, they're like, well, I don't know. We're not supposed to know. See, they've been trained through years. You either know it or you don't know it. The answer is either right or it's wrong. And that's kind of the mentality that they build. So the area between know it and don't know it is that area called figure it out. And that's what we want them to do. If we're going to work on critical thinking, we have to work on the figuring it out. You're not supposed to have everything memorized. You can tell this is an old meme. It actually refers to an overhead projector, but the point's the same. The point is you don't need all that technology to come up with critical thinking, but how can we use it to help do that? All the technology in the world will not compensate for human relations. So in this communication and critical thinking, once again, every time we see a meme, we're thinking, how can this apply to me? But how can I use this in the classroom to help students better understand? Some of the questions we'll ask is, what's your biggest challenge? And that's the question you need to ask yourself. What's your biggest challenge? And then the next question will be, well, what are you doing about it? What's the first step you're taking to overcome this challenge? And then another question will be, how can I help? As a leader, how can I help? Use this a lot of time with students in interventions. You say, well, I notice you're doing, have low test scores, not turning in homework, whatever the case may be. What can I do to help you? Of course, it's not my problem. This is their problem. But If I ask them what they can do, if they knew what to do, then quite frankly, they'd have probably already done it. They may not even know what to do. So that's why when we say things, well, you just need to try harder, that's not really good advice to just try harder. They don't even know what to do sometimes. So how would they answer that question? Just take them out of the picture, say, how can I help? And a lot of times they'll come up with something. You've probably heard it before. Well, no, if you wouldn't talk so fast and didn't cover so much material and made the test a little shorter and easier, I could probably do it. But when they say things like that, that's your teaching and learning moment. They have told you their perception. They've told you what they thought. So your response is going to be really important here because all those things are true. If we did all those things, that would help them. Unfortunately, I'm not going to change any of those as a teacher. But what if I could give you strategies as a student that would guarantee you the course would seem easier, material would seem shorter, the test would seem easier, the same end result you asked for? What if I could give you strategies that allowed you to get those? Would that work for you? Of course, you're asking a question that's kind of rhetorical. I mean, they have to say yes. They just asked for those things, and now you're saying you have a way to give it to them. But what you've done is you've shifted the responsibility. You've shown them that I'm not in control of your learning. You are. Now, when I go home and look in the mirror, I'm telling myself I'm in control of learning. But when I'm talking to a student, I want them to assume that control. What we're trying to do is devise and design a course structured enough that have enough support system built in that they can assume that responsibility. CEO of Campbell Soup called that's your ultimate leadership question because it helps you identify those problems. People are more apt to talk when you're asking what you can do to help them. And you may want to ask, what have you accomplished? What are your successes? Let's talk about those. We don't do that enough in education. If you're a division director, department chair, and you have a meeting coming up, challenge your faculty. Come and tell us about what you implemented and do last semester that worked for you, especially with this crisis going on, COVID crisis. What have you changed in your classes that has improved learning? In other words, turn the mindset to a more positive, proactive mindset instead of the negative, complaining, making excuses, or whining. That doesn't get us anywhere. That's a fixed mindset behaviors. We're looking for growth mindset behaviors. And of course, you want to make it sure that everyone understands where we're going. That's our main problem in education. This first day of ILA, all we're trying to accomplish other than connecting with each other is to understand it's all about learning. And I know that sounds simple. Every major stakeholder in this country, there has never been so much overwhelming agreement from every one of those stakeholders, except faculty. We've not gotten the buy-in on faculty. It's all about learning. Because you think about this, if all I do is cover content and test, the learning is in between there. That's up to the student. Historically in higher ed, well, that's the student's got to do that. And that's why a large portion of the population has been alienated from the benefits of higher education. So when we say that the learning that goes on between covering content and testing, what are we doing with that? Once it's all about learning, not about grades, not about covering content, about learning, it changes the whole picture. All of a sudden we have options available to us that we'd never even considered before. So that's why we have to be clear on what we're doing and why we're doing it. The why is very obvious. We have to get a more skilled workforce. And our students don't come to us prepared. Well, what are we doing about it? They're not incapable of learning. But times have changed drastically. We don't need to remind ourselves of that. But if we look back at some ads, we can see how these times have changed so drastically. Just in 1989, I can remember when computers came out for teachers. There were a lot of teachers that said, you know what, I'll just retire before I learn all this. It was just too big of a block for them to overcome, which is kind of sad when you're in the business of teaching and learning. And the moment you come across something that you have to learn new, you're ready to bail out. But I guess we'll all be at that point at some point in our career. There'll come a time in our career where we just don't want to change anymore, and we're ready just to move on and let our replacement do all those changes. And that's fine too. But to doctors, recommend Camel. And if you're not happy, it's not because you're not eating enough lard. That's the problem. And if you don't want to lose some weight, well, how about try some sanitized tapeworms? Take care of your problem. I mean, these are remedies that maybe seem very out of date. Times have changed drastically. Unfortunately, our instructional practices across the institutions and across the country have not. So our only question when we're dealing with strategies to improve learning, is it effective? Did it enhance learning? That's the only question. Too many times strategies are labeled to try to stifle innovation. We label straight, oh, that's just spoon feeding. Oh, that's just high schoolish. Oh, that's just, no, there's only one question. Was it effective at improving learning or not? If it was, then it's helping us meet the mission more effectively. So that's why today, you hear a lot of this, I know, well, I set high standards. I don't know what that statement's supposed to insinuate, but we hear that, oh, well, I set high standards. It doesn't matter what your standards. It matters what's the level of training, encouragement, support, and accountability. What's your level of those? Because if your level of expectations, if your level of standards is higher than the level of training, encouragement, support, and accountability, then there's a reason students aren't being successful, and it's not just the students. So our vision statement for ACCS, it says education must be a system that works for all. The data clearly shows that's not happening. So that's why we're addressing these issues. That's why we're talking about these things in a positive, constructive environment. You say, what's the best indicator of future academic and life success? Well, there's two answers, just depending on which direction you want to go. The answer is degree of self-discipline. Unfortunately, that's difficult to measure. Something we can measure is family income. You put 1,000 4-year-olds in a room. Do you know the best predictor of future academic and life success is is the level of family income? How sad is that? In 2020, it's still, when you are brought in or you raised in a family of poverty, neglect, and abuse, that should not be a life sentence. It shouldn't be a life sentence. I didn't choose my parents, my educational system, which elementary school I went to. I had no choice in that as a child. I should not have to suffer a life sentence because of that. What a good one. Teachers or students. Single greatest thing we mentioned in video number 1 you can do to increase in opportunities in life for yourself, your children, or future children. You need to be telling this to every single student we have, and that's the pursuit of higher education. Because they need to know how important this is. If they decide to quit in that pursuit of higher education, after knowing this anyway, they have to be telling themselves that they're okay with limited opportunities for themselves, their children, their future children. The pursuit of higher education. And that's because 2/3 of your jobs require that. Because see, we can only do what we know. If I was a student and I didn't know this, I may be more apt to quit. We can only do what we know. But when we know better, we must do better. As a term that's used a lot in this family supporting wages. We want to be able to provide jobs that have family supporting wages. Now, of course, when somebody says that, they're referring to the wages. They're referring to the actual pay. We know there's another word in there that affects that variable just as much, and that's family. How many is in your family? If it's just you may can get by with a minimum wage job. If there's 2 of you, it's going to require a little more. If there's 10 of you, I don't think there's a program we have that allow you family supporting wages for 10. So a lot of this, we always want to look at one side of the issue, which is income. Well, let's look at the other side. How many is in your family? And what are the ramifications if a student withdraws from a college? And that's pretty common for almost half our students in community college. We're talking national statistics as well as state. What are the ramifications? Well, what if you're being operated on? Would you want the surgeon to use strategies that they were comfortable with, that they felt were easier for them at the moment, or ones that would cut mortality rates in half? And that's a rhetorical question. These are just kind of get us thinking. In other words, if there's a better way to do something that'll improve the quality of someone's life, then absolutely we need to be sharing that amongst each other. And that's what ILA is for, to share those positive things that are working. And the same question be for a plumber, electrician. Of course, we don't just use what strategies we're comfortable with. We use the ones that are the most effective. So the mission of the community college, and I say the community college, every employee in the community college, is to inspire and facilitate learning. That's everyone's mission. Like we said, if all we get across the first day of ILA is it's all about learning, if that's all you can walk away with is that you get that, maybe you've already gotten it, then we're ready to start. We have the foundation in place to move forward. But to do that, there's a lot of things we got to keep in mind. We want to take our job dead serious. It is serious. Changing people's lives is serious. Don't take ourselves so serious. It's not about us. We're looking for a diversity and success, learning and completion. We use the acronym QTIP, but we also use one called KISS, and it was called Keep It Simple. Or as the military says, keep it simple, stupid. It's just a reminder to keep it simple. In the midst of chaos and frustration, keep it simple. So if we wanted to kiss the statement, if you want a diversity in success, learning, and completion, then it makes sense you need a diversity in instructional strategies. The more diverse your instructional strategies and support strategies, the more diverse group of students that will succeed. So our promise to educate all, and keep in mind we're the only post-secondary institution that promises that. Universities have a minimum ACT, they have requirements to get in. The community college system promises to educate all Americans, and that cannot be done and coexist in a culture of excuses. We have to focus on improvement, not excuses. So that's why the question will always be, what are you doing about it? And if the answer is nothing, well, what is your department doing about it? And if we don't know any of those, the only appropriate question left would be, I need assistance with this. Here's my problem, and I'm not getting it solved. Do you have any suggestions for me? In other words, we have to be personally responsible for our division, our students, our college, and for the morale of those. We've got a saying in leadership, never ever ask permission to lead. You will know when it's time. You'll be sitting in a committee meeting, there'll be complaints, negative, negative, negative. That's just a tap on your shoulder for somebody to turn this negative into a positive, to somehow turn this lack of action into action. It reminds me, we were at a Northeast Alabama swimming hole. We wanted to visit my daughter in Chattanooga, had the 3 grandkids with us, twin girls. I think we were about 12 or 13 at that time. Grandson was about 11. And we stopped at this place called the Hippie Hole. It was a little swimming hole we saw on the map. We Googled it. By the way, wonderful strategy. Don't know what to do? Google it. We have enough information at our fingertips, and sometimes that's hard to get used to, especially for folks like me. It's hard to get used to the fact, just Google it. So we found the swimming hole. We got down there, and there's some teenagers jumping off this 50-foot cliff and into the water. And well, one of the grandkids said, well, I want to go up there and watch them. So I told my wife I'll walk up there with them. It was 2 of them. One of the twin girls stayed with my wife, and I walked on up to the cliffs with them. We watched them jump a few times. I said, all right, let's go back on down to your Mimi. And the grandson said, well, I might want to jump. I said, well, there's not might want to. Either if you want to, do it. If you don't, let's walk on down. Well, he immediately jumped. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know what to say. He had launched off that 50-foot cliff into the water. Well, when he hit the water, of course, he came up. He was so excited, you know how it is when you do something like that. But I was safe. I was safe because I had his sister with me. She's the biggest scaredy cat of all, so I knew I'd be walking her back down. And then she was looking over to the side. He kept telling her, just jump. Come on, Lex, just jump. It's not that bad. He was trying to encourage her to have that courage she needed, because that's what encouragement means. Putting courage into someone that may not have it at that moment. Well, she said the same thing he said. I said, come on, Lex, we got to go. She said, well, I might want to jump too. I said, well, you can't just think about it. If you want to do it, just do it. Unbelievable. She launched. She jumped off the cliff. Now, when she came up, same thing. She was so excited that she had done something that took so much courage. And then they're looking at me. Of course, I'm wanting to walk back down. And they're saying, well, come on, Papa, aren't you going to jump? You can't think about it. You just have to come on. Well, when somebody uses your own medicine against you, it's terrible, isn't it? So I had to launch. I thought, good gracious, I'll probably hit the water. My old self will probably break into about 10 pieces. But, they were hollering at me, you got to jump. What do you mean? You jump out of an airplane, you won't jump off a little bitty cliff? So I finally had to jump. And we had a blast. We still remember that and talk about it today. But here's the point to that story. Who was doing the leading? And the answer is the grandson, the youngest one of the 3. We don't always have to be the one leading. Matter of fact, leaders want others to step up and take the lead. It's the whole purpose of leadership, is to build more leaders, not more followers. We're not dictators. We want to be leaders. He led. He encouraged the granddaughter. And then, quite frankly, she led me, because once she jumped, I had no choice in the matter. Oh, what a good meme for students. Just kind of keep it simple. We have students that have not even been privy to success skills in life. They've been raised in an environment where they weren't taught these skills. So some things, the simplest, can be the most profound. Complain about everything, blame about your problem, blame others, and then the last one, never be grateful. Research shows that the happiest people are those that are the most gracious. They appreciate what they have. And make no mistake about it, in your classroom, IntroILA, mindset over skill set. If that was not true, there'd be no such thing as underdogs. We know mindset is more important than skill set. That's why when Vince Lombardi took over the failing Green Bay Packers, first thing he said in a team meeting, you will be fired up with enthusiasm or you'll be fired with enthusiasm. Because he knew that if they came with the right mindset and enthusiasm, they could build the skills they needed to be successful. So we're working on an exercise. We'd put you each in a group and we'd have a member of that group. You can do the same thing in your classes. Tell the group something about yourself and do that in 60 seconds. At the end of 60 seconds, each member of that group tries to identify with one common experience with the speaker. What did I have in common with the things you said about yourself? And if I don't have anything common, then I'll be the next one to share my experiences. And then same thing, everyone around the table will say what they have in common with my experiences. Just another connect activity. Now, an important one to remember about your course is ask yourself, what outcomes, what do you want your students to be able to do from your course? What should they obtain from your course? Not a list of things, what's the number one thing? And then the next question, and this is a good one to think about, what do you want your students to remember about your course? Now, we can cut that from 10 years, we can cut it in half, say 5 years, say 2 years from now. Heck, sometime we can say 2 weeks. So thinking about it that way helps you think about, okay, what's really important? As I go through my list of objectives, which ones are essential and which ones are not so essential? I can make that distinction if I ask those questions to myself. And that's why when we're dealing with a problem, we like to take the biggest problem or challenge first. One of the best ways to teach this critical thinking we talk about is to model it in what we do. We're in the teaching field. We're constantly changing. We're constantly adapting and improving. The hardest part of that critical thinking is self-reflection. That is the most difficult, to actually look into myself and say, what could I have done to improve upon this situation? But it's the number one way to accept personal responsibility and avoid that victim mentality that blames others. Because as long as it's somebody else's fault, keep in mind, there's nothing for me to change. And that's why blaming is so unproductive. It's basically a way of saying, I don't need to change. Somebody else caused this problem. Of course, it wouldn't be responsible for a parent just allow their children to ignore chores, ignore homework, ignore all this stuff. And of course, we wouldn't do that. It's not our fault they didn't. We don't use the word fault. Take fault out of your vocabulary and replace it with responsibility to react. No, it's not your fault students come unprepared. No, it's not your fault they may do certain things, but it is your responsibility to react. We've said it's all about learning. And for those that already get it, it may sound too simple for you, but keep in mind, when we say we want faculty buy-in, that's really the only thing we need buy-in for is the fact it's all about learning. Because if someone has not realized it's all about learning, they're stuck in an old archaic paradigm that undermines the growth mindset in learning in the 21st century. It's toxic to a learning environment. That's when we start off in class. First day of class, I'd always remind students, because we're going to get some deep into critical thinking. We're going to challenge some paradigms. So I have to remind them, I will never say anything to offend you. However, I can't promise you that something I say doesn't offend you. Now, I need to think about that to get the difference in the two. It's sad when a dictionary has to add a new word, post-truth. And they had to add it because facts are less influential about shaping opinion than appeals to emotions and beliefs. So you wonder why I feel like I'm in society where everybody's feelings and emotions are more important than the facts, that are more important than the results. That creates a very difficult environment for teaching critical thinking, especially when they see the leaders of our country, practicing some of the same things. That's why we're in ILA together. Our whole objective is to create an environment conducive to collaboration, inspiration, and innovation. And that environment is a positive, constructive environment. Whining, complaining, making excuses, no tolerance for that. We're focused on proactive action. And that's why. Because all of us know more than any one of us. So just keep that in mind when you're sitting in another committee meeting and you think something's common sense. So therefore you don't say it. Well, we're in a world where common sense is almost a superpower. So ILA is not here to make you do anything. It's not here to necessarily teach you anything, but each other is who we're here to learn from. Everyone in this program is a teacher and everyone is a student. Problem with crisis is they tend to make people resort back to isolationism. So we don't seek out the things that could help us most. So we talk about cognitive approach in that one. That's the opposite of emotional. The opposite of an emotional reaction is a logical action. A cognitive approach is more concerned about the results and the feelings of accomplishment. Visiting other colleges, wonderful ways. Every time I go to another college, all I'm doing is looking at everything. I'm looking at walls, I'm looking at what they have, I'm looking at the learning environment. What ideas can we take back to our college to implement? And we want to avoid those misquotes. Very easy to do sometimes. You know, I've heard people say, well, our dean said so and so and so and so, when actually that's not what the dean said at all. But it's a way to get support for someone. If I didn't like something that was coming down from the system office, what if I told somebody, well, you know what, system office just wants us to give grades. They just want to dummy this stuff down and give grades. Well, of course, everybody's going to agree with that. They're going to be like, yeah, that's ridiculous. I can't believe they're doing that. And so all of a sudden you get support. You get support for a message that is not accurate, but it doesn't matter. It helps your feelings because I now have support. So avoid those misquotes or deceit, because that's why we have ILA. One person cannot lead the entire state, the entire institution. It requires leadership throughout the faculty ranks. That's the only way we're going to reach the kind of level of effectiveness we need that closes student achievement gaps and creates an equity and opportunity. Your outcomes are not determined by your president or dean. They're determined by the strategies you choose to use. Now, if you're choosing to use certain strategies, then of course we should be the one responsible for the outcomes of those strategies and the results of those strategies because we chose them. And we can't shortchange ourselves. There's no reason to stop at 40%, 50%, 80%. Everything we do in here, we'll be looking at maximum. How can we maximize? We want to maximize a growth mindset, then we assume maximum responsibility, which would be 100% responsibility. Makes perfect sense on that meme. Problem with change, everybody wants it. You start talking about who wants to change, well, they might not get as many. And then when you start about who wants to lead the change, you're really going to have a void. That's why we say never ever ask permission to lead. You'll know when it's time. That is the biggest failure. It's making no improvement. We ask our students to make all the improvements, so we need to make them also. So fear being in the exact same place you were today. Your challenges is for the session, well, the first session we come up with will be our Zoom session. The next one will be a face-to-face. Every session we hold, you need to come with strategies you've implemented since the last session that have improved learning. That's just an ongoing challenge. Bring strategies, newly implemented strategies that improve learning. Now, many of you may have dreaded coming to ILA. You got too much stuff to cover. I got so much content. I hear this all the time. I got so much stuff to cover. Well, at least we've identified the problem. You're trying to cover too much content. If you're that frustrated, you can imagine how frustrated students are, because this quantity and quality is on the seesaw. So if we want more quality, we may have to give up some quantity. That's why we analyze our objectives for relevancy. Which ones are essential and which ones are not so essential. And that will be an ongoing process, of course. The missing ingredient out of those content and testing has been the learning, the reflection, the discussion, all those things that build the skills our students need. Quote by, well, they credit it to Nick Saban. I'm sure other folks have said it. Suffer the pain of disappointment or the pain of discipline. You know, a lot of faculty that they didn't apply the discipline to implement an LMS, to use the learning management system for what it was designed to do, which is manage learning. And if I haven't done that, and all of a sudden a crisis hits, and now all of a sudden everything has to be converted online or to the LMS, then I might have to suffer a little disappointment. I may be a little more stressed out than some of the other faculty who are a little better prepared. Well, we're learning from that. We're saying, well, now let's get better prepared for the future so we don't get caught in this same boat again. You want to stimulate thinking, stimulate curiosity, then start with questions that stimulate that curiosity. Whoa, what a powerful one on so many personal responsibility. And that's the end of it for our video number 2.